Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where we talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 1, Episode 2 of Three Pines. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I would say it's like a great episode with all the reveals and everything, but when it's just a somber episode the way it is, it just kind of feels weird to call it a great episode, so that's why I'm just kind of, nah. Either way, there were some interesting developments. I did like that. Obviously, you have the Armand gathering everyone in the village, because right, you're all here, so everyone get in your positions. And I kept thinking it was weird that Saul would just keep being in the wrong position. They're like, no, you weren't here. No, you weren't here either too. Why are you doing that? So, and obviously with everything going on, someone could have easily come over and killed her. And now it puts Armand in that situation where it's right, it could be a killer or it could be a pair of killers. And no one would have seen it with just, because whoever it was knew that B was going to crush it. So they knew that that was the perfect opportunity to commit the murder. What's also really interesting too is the opening to this episode was Cece killing her mom. Because her mom so we kind of learned the backstory later on, but it seems like her mom, Eleanor, was taken to a psychiatric facility or something. And she, and Cece went to live with her dad, but her dad wasn't a good person either. And her mom tried to eventually, when she got out, try to say, hey, I want to be here for you. And, try to be in her life, but that never happened. And, because she tormented Cece, and now it's Cece ended, and that's when you kind of get into the cycle of things. This episode really leans into the cycles of so much. I even love jumping ahead a little bit, that final that line to from Armand when it's related to this case, basically saying that this the direct parallels to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, that this is a Frankenstein's monster, a very a patchwork of horrors, because it's just there's just so much tragedy riddled in this situation. Ultimately they're trying to find out about Cece's parents, because they ultimately find out, we as the audience know, well, we know she killed her mom, but then later on when she's with when Armand confronts Emily, I was like, wait, is that actually her? Did she actually survive? I was like, is that why she's coughing? I'm like, because she almost died and there's some residual effects from it. I was like, there's no way Cece would just live up in the same town as her actual mom. So that didn't make any sense. I was like, plus once again, we saw her. That's why I was kind of confused. I was like, wait, what? Did she actually survive? But it's no, we find out Emily is her aunt. That was Eleanor's sister. Which, side note, I looked at IMDb and stuff like that. The actress who plays Eleanor, her name's Jill, did not notice. I was looking through stuff, and one of her photos on IMDb, it's her and other actresses, and it's oh, this is them at Dragon Con, and it has Sailor Jupiter and stuff like that. I was like, wait, are they Sailor Moon voice actors? And she's Luna from Sailor Moon. I was like, wait, what? She's done quite a bit of voice work over the years too, but I was like, holy, I didn't realize. It's been so long since I've seen Sailor Moon. The last time I saw Sailor Moon was when it was originally airing on Toonami. I didn't even see, I've never seen the more recent, remake or whatever that came out in the past few years. But, when it used to come on Toonami, back in the day, when I was in elementary school, that's the last time I've ever seen, Sailor Moon. So it's been that long for me, but I didn't realize. I was like, holy crap, that's wild. But either way, the point was that Cece had created this whole story about she had these great parents and yada, 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 but they couldn't track down her parents. And now they know why, because everything in her book was a fantasy. And immediately, the fact is that, our mom was right, if she's constructing a story like that, her parents must not have been good people. And we see neither one, it wasn't just her mom, her father wasn't a good person either. So, and ultimately, it's this interesting thing where there's a quote at once again, the place that B has it's the same title as Cece's book, so it's like there can't be a coincidence, despite her saying last episode, oh, it's just a coincidence. Like, you could tell she was hiding something, but it's like, oh, did she just steal the quote from you? But it's also from the Bible, but it's very specific word choices taken from the Bible. It's like the word, it isn't calm that's used, it's the word still. So it's like, but why use kind of that quote, but kind of put your own spin to it? And he kept looking at like the first initials of it. Cause we saw with Eleanor's mom, we saw with Eleanor at the beginning, she had like, was it BK, ML on her arm. And it's like, what's that about? And then later on, when he pieces it together, Armand's like, it's be calm. Like, that's what the quote's about. Like, basically, they took something and they basically kind of made it their own by, that's why the quote was changed to be calm, because it's meant to be like a play on like their initials put together is BKML, be calm. You know, kind of a different, like, stylized name. You could totally see a band doing something like that. Kind of stylizing their name like that. I mean, it's kind of resembling of like Paris, like the band. It's PVRIS, but it's Paris. You know, it's just one of those things. Like, so I could definitely see that. It should be I know it's a weird situation to do that, but I'm like, it'd actually be a pretty sick. I don't know, like well, because I know, like, oh god, I know what band was it? Danger Kids. They have an album called The Blacklist, and they kind of have one of those things where, like, they're missing letters from it, which kind of makes their, like, the album, like, art for it kind of pretty dope. Like that, it's, like, kind of, like, simplistic, but it's, like, just, like, I really like that. Cause I think aren't they one of those bands that kind of does that, where, like, some of their letters from their name is missing? I know there's, like, a New York band called Varsity that, like, spells it, like, VRSTY. Yeah, VRSTY, I think. Regardless, I'm going on this huge tangent. I shouldn't have gone down the tangent I went down. Sorry. Getting back to it, I kind of derailed from this very, like, serious thing, just because that's how my mind is sometimes. But he ultimately ended up figuring out it was Emily, but obviously finding out, like, oh, you're her aunt, and Cece, you know, wanted nothing to do. Because I guess it makes sense to some extent, because the only reason why she came here because she's like, oh, I thought, hey, my niece wants to get close to me and she wants me to get introduced to her child. But it's like, no, it's just she came here to make sure, hey, this is her kind of starting over, but also keeping an eye on me to make sure I don't spill the beans about the truth, because it is the thing of she basically rewrote her reality, which is actually heartbreaking to think, like, she can be an asshole. She was an asshole, but there's so much with Cece's story that you're kind of like, man, you feel bad for her, because it was all based in hurt and pain and trauma. The whole thing of like, oh yeah, like basically bury stuff, which is like, burying stuff is never a good idea. Once again, I know that from personal experience. I bottle a lot of stuff out, and that makes me kind of fly in fits of rage sometimes. Like, so, like, I know it's not the healthiest thing to do, but, like, that was her way of dealing with her trauma, her pain, and it obviously eventually came to the surface when she decided to murder her mom a year prior. But the fact is that she constructed this lie about herself, because it's like, right, you keep telling yourself this lie over and over again. Eventually, you're hoping to rewrite reality. You believe in that lie so much, you have to say it over and over again, this philosophy, because that's the only way to fully kind of embrace it. That's the only way in her mind to make it true. And it's just, but, you know, it didn't stop her from lashing out at her child, because even Emil was like, yeah, like, she murdered her own daughter with words. And it's just like, she watched Cree from afar, because that was all she could do, you know? Because even she recognizes, like, right, my sister wasn't right in the head. It's like, right, sadly, they both became, like, it seems like Eleanor became a monster just because of, you know, some mental issues there. And sadly, that led to Cece becoming a monster just because of the psychological and physical and mental abuse she, you know, sustained for her mom. And I don't think she ever physically abused Cree, but she did constantly verbally and psychologically and mentally, like, break her down and made her feel worthless, you know? it's, you know, and obviously like her husband Richard felt the same way too, where it's like, right, he loved her, but the problem is like he couldn't stand waking up. He's like, I actually do feel relieved being able to wake up without having to stare at someone who obviously hates me. And he's like, I don't hate her, but he's like, right, he's like, wow, like if my crime would be bringing something to like manifesting. He's like, I wanted so hard to like wrap my hands and choke her to death that for cheating. But he's like, right, like she was dying while I was like basically manifesting that in my head, because he knew about the affair. And that also is what the Saul was doing. He was covering up. I thought, like, right, why don't you just admit to the police you had the affair? It's like, I forgot they brought it up last episode. He is married, so that would have been a whole issue, and he doesn't want his wife to know. But he's like, right, I don't what was it? It was like, I don't want to hurt my wife or something like that. But it's like, no, you are hurting the people you love, because it's like you are wasting their time. They're in a marriage with someone that can't be faithful to them, or like, because obviously you don't love her, you're just staying with her. Like, and he thinks by hiding the affair, you know, he's like, right, I don't love her anymore, but you know, she deserves. It's like, no, the word was because he said like, I respect my wife. It's like, no, if you're cheating on your wife, you don't respect her. In fact, you're not, you're wasting her time when she could just be off trying to find happiness somewhere else. Obviously, if you're not happy, don't keep yourself with someone who believes like everything's okay, honky dory, when all this is going behind their backs. Like that's not fair to that other person in the relationship, you know? So obviously he loves CDC too much to do anything to her, but obviously that's where the Emile situation, Emily situation comes from. But like I said, the tragedy of it, her daughter was 17, her daughter and her husband died 30 years ago. So I think that's probably makes it rub even harsher in her face, where it's like, hey, my sister had a daughter and she didn't treat her right, and that daughter had a daughter of her own, but I was kept away from. And it's like, it's this nasty, complicated, hurtful cycle. And I think it's because Emily came from, because she was like, she said that Eleanor always had issues, but she thought like she'd be a little more stable upon having a child. But I guess maybe it was like clinical depression, and it just got worse, you know, even having a child. So like, and it just got worse and worse over the years. But it's like, yeah, look, that I think for her it probably cut deep, where it's like, my niece has everything, and I ended up, it's like, right, you have this husband and this daughter who you don't like either. But for Emily, it's like she had neither, and like she lost that 30 years ago. And as that conversation she had with Armand about, you know, having that closed door that you're afraid to open, because if you do, you're going to be hit by that pain. And he's like, yeah, sometimes you check on the door, crack it just to see if it still hurts, and it does, you know? So I figured out pretty early, well, not early on, like, what made me eventually figure out that it was Creed that was the killer is because of the dream that Armand had. He said, where Blue was like, you need to listen for the silence. And in my mind, I was like, oh, that's Creed. Because if you look back to it, Creed's had the least amount of dialogue since her mom died. Because the only verbal, like, only thing she said, like, the only time she's ever talked, at least on screen, has been the few exchanges she had, the very, very minimum and exchanges she's had with Armand is all we've gotten. So like the little bit they had back and forth last episode about dead parents, which feels so weird to say, but also her, you know, being like, yeah, I want to find the person who killed my mom or whatever. So, but that's all she said. And that, to me, she's been the most quiet person, because he's talked to everyone else and everyone else has kind of talked. So she felt like she was the most quiet to me. So I thought that was fascinating. But ultimately, when Emile, God, I keep saying Emile, like, because for whatever reason in my head, when I'm seeing Emily written out like that, I want to say Emile, because I keep, like, not including, like, the last I and E to it or whatever. Emily, I'm so sorry. Emily kept, you know, she figured out that Armand had figured it out pretty early on, and eventually she went off to, like, and the way she was talking, like, oh, thank you for letting me, we'll talk, you can ask your questions, brighten her, and she walks away, she's kind of got this smile on her face. I was like, is she about to go kill herself? That's why he had told, Yvette to watch her, but sadly she ended up falling asleep, And she left the confession tape behind, and she walked out into the snow, the same, like, kind of like, right, the whiteout that was responsible for killing her daughter and husband in a car accident situation. So she went out there to die with them, but luckily our mom was able to get to her, and she's going to be okay. But it's not until Yvette had messed around with the boot and saw the bottom and was like, right. From that angle, there's no way Emil would have known that those are the type of boots. Those boots, having the spikes at the bottom of them, are still a crucial part to the murder. So whoever it was had to have known about the spikes. And it's like, well, who would know that? People living with her. And that's where it circled back to me. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, it definitely was Cree. But, yeah, it's like the killer confessed to her about everything, but forgot some of the details, so... And I guess at some point in time, maybe Richard figured it out, or maybe maybe at some point she confessed, or maybe even Emily came to him and told him what was what, and it's like, right, I'm going to confess and protect her. That's what family's for, you know? And, you know, at the end of the day, it's sad. It's like, right, your mom didn't even, like, oh, you got the idea because sometimes, like, people would be punished in like an electric chair. Like, it's enough to hurt you, but not enough to kill you. It was kind of like a punishment for children. And it's like, oh, but your mom never actually had to use it. Her disappointment was enough. And once again, that's the saddest thing about it. It's just like, it is this cycle of she watched her mother kill her mother and ended up killing her own mom because she didn't find out she felt like she was kind of all alone. You know, with like just her mom, because her dad wasn't doing as much. Like, it is that sad thing in an abusive relationship situation where abuse is happening and one parent kind of doesn't do enough to kind of protect the child sometimes. Like, her father should have like pulled her away from all of that. But I think for him, it's like, right, he was so in love with her. Plus, regardless of it all, that's Cree's mother. So I think it's just I think it's guilt on a lot of parts for him, I guess, then, because of how he handled it as well. And for Cree, it's like, right, my mom told me how to fix my own situations, and she followed her mom. I don't think her mom brought her there. She probably just followed her mom there, but maybe her mom like was driving there, and I don't know if she always had the intention of killing her mom, but maybe it's just like, you know what, I'm going to do it now, and did it. And maybe she just happened to have taken Cree along with her, and Cree followed her in there and saw it. So she witnessed her mom killing her mom, and it inspired her to do it, because it's like, right. And that's the sad thing, that Cece was so caught up in her own pain and trauma, but more so because she had buried it down so much. And the same thing for Cree, like, she tried to bottle it up, but it's like, right, the body kind of like has a way of like floating that to the surface, and it's like, right. So Cece couldn't even like realize what she was doing, that she was repeating the same cycle of what went down with her mom, and she was doing the same thing to Cree. And, you know, Cree's even asking at the end of it, I was like, am I going to jail? And Armand's like, I hope not. Because once again, it's like, it is a sad situation. It's a tragedy that played out this way. It's just a cycle of abuse led to all of this, you know? And that's why I figured, like, the moment they introduced the beginning, I was like, oh, are they going to try and make Cece sympathetic? And they kind of are. Doesn't excuse, yes, it doesn't excuse what she did to Cree, but it makes you understand, like, hey, it is this cycle of abuse that continued. And it's just like, if things had been different, maybe if Emily would have been able to get closer to Cree, she could have pulled her away from her mother and, like, right, feel like, you know, once again, I think her dad loved her, and obviously, like, her, but it's like when she had her mom just constantly berating her, tearing her down, that she just never felt like she was good enough, you know, because that was, Cece, you know, taking all of that from her own mother and putting it on her own daughter, you know, because that was kind of her way to kind of, I think, that was her way of surviving what she'd been through. And once again, that was by burying and just, you know, kind of giving terrible advice and stuff like that from the book. But, yeah. It's really heartbreaking that this all, you know, ended up tragically playing out like this. And even Yvette's at the end be like, oh, a psychopath. Is like, no, like, you know, a child in this situation should kind of garner some sympathy. You know, once again, the patchwork horrors that was like Frankenstein's monster in this case, I thought was so very fascinating. Once again, it's just like, from the mother to daughter situation, like, across 3 generations in that regard. And like I said, for Emily, it just cuts even deeper because it's like, right, I kind of haven't had anything for 30 years, and just like everything with her sister and her niece, just, it's like, oh, like if I maybe she probably even regrets, like if I had, even when she came here, if I had reached, because she didn't want to, like, if she ever reached out to Emily, if she ever reached out to Cree and Cece found about it, it's like, oh, we would leave and you'd never be in her life again. So she had to keep her distance. That was the only way she was going to keep, like, Cree in her life. But it's like, and sadly, Cree didn't find out about her aunt until after she had already murdered her mom. So even Armand also adding in that, like, the fact is that you had this situation of everyone in this town knew about Cece's abuse, but no one did anything about it. And there's nothing that can be done. Like, I think in this case, it's not like, right, being a bystander, because yeah, everyone knew what was what, but like everyone like celebrated her being dead after the fact. But, they are kind of culpable in playing this too. They are the mob, that killed the tragic monster that is Frankenstein's monster. It's like, right, you saw in this case Cece, who she was. None of you stepped in, you did anything, but here you are celebrating when she's dead, and like this could have all been prevented. Like Cree wouldn't have to be carrying all this if they had done something more, But it's that thing, I think, of just being so caught up in your own life. I love the Frankenstein parallel that they're kind of going between. That's obviously the story of Frankenstein and this. So. And obviously this episode was also riddled. Well, really quickly before I move on, when he went to talk to B, a feather dropped on. I was like, oh, he says like someone gave it to me. I was like, oh, that's the one you got from the Two Rivers family. But it turns out he has one from them, the whole Blue Jay situation, but he also has one of his own, because she was like, oh, you must not know what it's like to bury the 2 people you love most in this world. And he didn't say anything at the time, but he does. Like, he had to watch his mom and dad get buried. And that was the thing for, he was like, yeah, I misread your situation, Cree. Like, you and me didn't have the exact same situation, but we did know what it was like to bury our pain, But the other tragic side of this episode is that Armand and Isabel got Pierre to look into everything, and it turns out, well, for one, Missy keeps going out in front of the SQ station, but no one pays her any attention. They just keep walking by her like she's invisible, which obviously there's that beautiful, I say beautiful, but it's from a storytelling perspective. It's tragic, it's sad, yet also, the parallels for it's like, right, she felt invisible, and that's why Emily was saying like, oh, I was able to get away from because I was invisible. And I guess you make the argument so was Cree, especially because like, right, people knew about what was happening, but no one stepped in, and Cree always felt invisible, to everyone else. So I think that parallel kind of works in that regard. But either way, Missy was just tired of not being seen and feeling like her daughter wasn't being seen. And they looked into the investigation. It turns out like Tommy had basically bought drugs like 2 days prior or something like that. Which, with all this setup, you can't help but feel like whoever killed, because it does seem highly possible now that like just the fact is that like even Missy's like, I feel it, my daughter's not in this world anymore. I'm like, she probably is sadly gone. And just like, no matter how much you're pleading with other people, like maybe like you could have gotten not some closure, but maybe somewhere towards answers a lot sooner if people had just been willing to listen. But it could be like whoever did this might be a cop for them to be able to do, like, I don't know whether it was an accident or what it had to be like, but they had to be covering their tracks, and they're kind of leaving enough breadcrumbs to be like, oh yeah, she's out there, she's old enough, she's on her own. They must know like, right, she's 18. So they're hoping that police, which they ultimately do, just got like, she ran away, let's leave it at that. And and sadly the only people pushing for more to be done is Missy Because it's like, right, you're just going to say like, my daughter is off doing drugs. But like, I know my daughter, she wouldn't leave. She wouldn't call. Like, the fact is, she even talks about it with Isabel, where it's like, right, my mom left those school that indigenous children were put in. It's like, my mom ran away from that at 15. And she promised like, hey, no matter what, I'm going to make a way to like, love my children. And it's like, right, she didn't know love, but she made sure that I did put everything aside just for my protection and for me. So for her, and that's what makes this whole thing harder for her. It's like, right, she feels like she let down Blue. It's like, right, my child, like I didn't do a good enough job protecting her, because every time she left the community, she was going to be endangered, you know? And that's why it's just like, that's why she can't give up, because she knows on some level, it's like, if my baby was out there in the world, she would have contacted me. And it's just a heartbreaking situation that you're just like, and once again, it gets even sadder, because when you do think it's just about, it's like, right, this isn't just a made up story. Like, time and time again, you hear about like, this is a more and more prevalent thing that happens in to indigenous people. Specifically, it's like children and like specifically women go missing. Armand promised to help us, and you're just kind of giving up. It's easier. It's like, right, if you think she's in New York, go to New York and find her. It's like, yeah, but we can't legally. But it's like, right, but I'd make the argument, at the very least, even if you believe that, even if you do, just have someone do a wellness check on her. Like, but I guess it's like, legally you can't do anything, especially because for Armand, it's like, it's not even officially our case. He kind of took this off books, and because if his captain found out he was actually doing this, he'd be even more upset, and like he already is. But and Isabel feels even more guilty, because she feels like, no, there's more we can do, especially with the ending where, you know, Missy killed herself. I mean, we don't know if we don't know if Missy is dead, or whether like maybe she's in a coma, or like what kind of state because she might just be dead. I hope not, but it could, because she just feels like it was for multiple reasons. One, I think it's just the guilt of not being able to live with all this, but two, it's like, right, now you'll pay attention. If my sacrifice can make you finally get some answers from my daughter, then it was all worth it. I was thinking that was like, maybe the other person was, maybe that's like her niece or something, because I do believe the other lady that's there, maybe that's Missy's sister, which I do believe that is that actress's sister in real life, maybe. I don't know. Because I think they both have the last name Lightning, which is so dope. The actress who plays Missy, her name's Crystal Lightning. I'm like, that is a sick name, dude. Also, I should put it together, because like, geez, the ending is depressing. So we'll circle back to it in a second, but just kind of slight uplifting thing. I kept seeing in their IMDb's like they were in the show Trickster. I was like, right. The Missy, she played the main protagonist's mom in Trickster. If you've never seen Trickster, it's a Canadian show that circles around a very specific First Nation people's like lore and mythology about shapeshifters and tricksters. Well, she played the mom. Her daughter Blue played, I can't remember, it's been a while since I've seen it, but she played I kept thinking that, but I couldn't remember. But looking at her face a little bit more this episode, I was like, yeah, the actress who played Blue, she kind of played the love interest, and the main character's kind of love interest in the show. So sadly, it was canceled. It's actually a whole conversation. I highly recommend if you're interested in it. It's a 6-episode show, but I think it is based specifically on a book, so you can probably still get the ending that way. But yeah, it was going to come back for a second season, but they canceled it. It's a whole story behind it. I highly recommend you read into it to find out the reasonings behind that, but tangents and all that side, I'm not going to go into it as much here, because I've already tangented it enough, especially just because I think it's just like me talking about this ending anymore, because it's such a heartbreaking ending. I mean, and that's the sad thing for her. It's like, right, feeling like that's all she could do to get notice for her. It's like, right, I'm not invisible. You'll finally pay attention to me. You won't walk past me now. Like, here I am. And just like the blood pulling on the poster of Blue. And now Armand's going to feel guilty. And it's like, right, the rest of that family, it's like, right, they already lost Blue and now potentially missing. Like I said, she might have survived, but I mean, I don't know. Because I don't know, like, the height of that fall and stuff like that. It seemed like that, I was like, it seemed like that might kill her, but we'll have to wait to see next episode. Like, either way sucks, but at least if she's alive, there's some hope. But it's like, if she's not, that's even more of a crushing blow. But for Armand, it's like, right, that guilt of, I said I was doing everything I could, but was I really? Because even Isabel was like, did we really do everything we could? And I think that guilt's really going to stay, to the point it's like, right, I owe it to her to find out the truth then, you know? She made this sacrifice so that we will actually, and I can't let that sacrifice go in vain. So I think he will actually look into the truth of things. So, like I was bringing up in the first episode, we did get the conclusion to everything with Cece's murder, but like everything with Blue will be like the overarching story. So I'm wondering, is that just going to be, like I said, at least this week, episodes 3 and 4 were released. So I was like, okay, so it's always going to be a package deal. Like, there are 2 episode arcs that I think are a very specific case, while also, like, you know, part of that, those episodes will also be covering the overarching Blue situation as well. So at least that's what I'm expecting the kind of the structure of this to be. But I'm very interested to see ultimately what ends up happening going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.